The tide window was 11 minutes. Sera Vane hit the base of the cliffside at a dead run, salt water already soaking her boots, the cave entrance ahead, a low black gap in the rock face that the sea swallowed completely at high tide. Behind her, she could hear them, two sets of boots, heavier than hers, crunching down the shingle at a pace that said they were not conserving energy. Morren's people had found the second marker. She ducked under the overhang and pressed into the dark, letting her eyes adjust for a single second before pulling the shielded torch from her pack and snapping it on. The passage ran straight for about 8 meters before bending right, sea-smoothed stone on all sides, ceiling low enough to graze her hair, a smell that was not ocean alone. Something older. Something sealed. Sera, a hiss from 6 meters behind her. Jem, 16, catching up with the advantage of knowing she would have slowed at the entrance. He slid in beside her, breathing hard, a long streak of seaweed on his left sleeve. They're right behind us. How many? 3. Morren's not with them. He's taking the sea route. He hired a boat. She processed that in 2 seconds. Morren had anticipated the cliff approach and planned around it, which meant he had better information about this site than she'd estimated. He also had the discipline to divide his people, some chasing, one flanking. That was not good. Then we move faster than the boat, she said, and ran. The passage widened after the bend, opening into a chamber that had never been natural. The ceiling climbed to 4 meters. The walls were cut stone rather than wave-worn rock, with the kind of precise right angles that announced intention. The floor was level. Along the left wall, a row of what had once been stanchions, hollow cylinders of a dark, dense metal she could not name, stood at measured intervals, their tops long since snapped off. At the far end of the chamber, a doorway. Not a passage. A doorway with a carved lintel, and beyond it the dark went deeper. Jem was on her shoulder, reading the room the same way she was. He had a good eye. He always had. The stanchions were power nodes, he said quietly, like the ones in the southern dig, the Vel'Tharan design template. You sure? I'm sure of the spacing, the alloy's different. But the function, yes. She filed that and kept moving. The Vel'Tharan had been the empire. That was 10,000 years defunct, their ruins scattered across a band of coastline stretching 800 kilometers north to south, most of them pillaged, a few protected, a handful still sealed. Sealed meant either worthless or locked by a mechanism nobody had cracked yet. Morren's research had apparently landed on one that was neither. The carved lintel slowed her for 3 full seconds. She brought the torch close. The inscription ran in a double line along the underside, dense symbol clusters in the spiral notation that characterized late Vel'Tharan construction. She could not read it, but she recognized 2 forms, a spiral that indicated sovereignty and a handglyph that signified inheritance. The handglyph pointed inward, toward the deeper chamber. She went through the doorway. The inner vault was enormous, a hangar-scale space, ceiling lost in dark above the torch's reach, walls lined with tiers of sealed compartments that curved around the perimeter. The floor was a single flat slab of polished black stone, not scored or cracked despite whatever had happened to everything outside. And at the chamber's center, on a low altar of the same black stone, sat the chest. It was obsidian dark, rectangular, roughly the size of a large toolbox, and covered edge to edge in glyphs that had been cut so fine they looked like lace over stone. A single central locking mechanism, a recessed disc with 4 radial slots, sat flush in the lid. No handle, no obvious opening. Sera crossed the vault at a fast walk, already calculating. The 4 slots in the locking disc matched the profile of the transit rods in her pack, 4 thin cylinders of carved Vel'Tharan stone that had accompanied the map fragment she'd bought 8 months ago from a salvager who hadn't known what he had. She had spent those 8 months building a translation thread from the rod's own inscriptions, working backward from 3 partial Vel'Tharan glossaries to determine that the rods were not decorative but functional. A key set, The inscription read, "For the vault of the Unbroken Line." She had not told Morren any of that. She had not told anyone. The salvager had sold to him too. She knew that now, but Morren had not had the rods. She reached the altar and set her pack down. Sera, Jem was at the vault entrance watching behind them. They're in the outer chamber. How long? 90 seconds, maybe less. She pulled the first rod. Her hands were steady, they always were when it mattered. The rod slid into the leftmost slot cleanly, seated with a soft, precise click that resonated through the altar stone and up through her palms. She felt it as a vibration, low and even, like a frequency that had been waiting for exactly this input. Second rod click. 60 seconds. She felt the altar shift fractionally under her fingertips. Not a tremor, a recognition. The stone was not inert. She had half expected this. Late Vel'Tharan construction embedded passive biometric readers into primary relics, thread-thin filaments of a bioreactive mineral that cataloged contact. Every time she had touched a Vel'Tharan surface in 8 months of research, she had been contributing to a record she couldn't read. The chest was reading her now, cross-referencing against whatever profile the vault of the Unbroken Line had been built to match. Her throat was dry. She kept her hands steady. Third rod click. A faint pulse of light tracked from the first rod slot to the second, then to the third, hair-thin lines of pale amber running through the glyph lace on the chest's surface like a current finding a circuit. Sera. I hear them, she said, and did not look up. Fourth rod. Click. The locking disc turned. Not by her hand, she had not touched the disc itself. It rotated under its own drive, a quarter turn clockwise, and the 4 slots aligned into a single horizontal line, and then the chest rose. Not the lid. The whole chest lifted fractionally from the altar surface, hovered on a film of light so thin she could only see it where the glyph lines intersected, and opened. The interior held a single object, a sphere the size of her fist, the color of old bone, with a surface of interlocking carved panels that had no visible seams. It was already glowing, not a torch reaction glow but a self-sustained radiance, the amber deepening toward warm gold as she watched. She reached in and lifted it. The moment her fingers closed around it, the glyph lace on the altar surface blazed full white. Every sealed compartment on the vault's tiers lit at the same instant, not opening, but acknowledging, amber panels igniting in long cascades up toward the dark ceiling, the whole chamber suddenly alive with the stored energy of 10,000 years. And from the sphere in her hands, a sound she felt as much as heard, a tone, deep and resonant, and then a voice. Clear, definite, neither male nor female, the pure register of a Vel'Tharan archive voice, the record she had spent 8 months learning to parse. Vel'Tharan's unbroken heir, the vault recognizes its own. Behind her, at the vault entrance, the footsteps stopped. Sera turned. 3 figures in the arch, Morren's contractors, all adults, all better equipped than she was, and all of them had gone completely still. One had a torch. Its beam was pointed at the chest, at the sphere, at the illuminated tiers at her. Their expressions were not threatening. They looked like people who had just run very hard towards something and arrived to find it already concluded. Jem was in front of them, slightly to the right. Having made the extremely practical decision to step aside the moment, the vault lit up rather than be between 3 alarmed adults and anything that might come next. She looked at the sphere in her hands. The amber gold glow was steady now, not frantic, not warning, but the calm radiance of a lock that had found its correct key and settled into its intended state. One of the contractors moved, not toward her, toward the chest. She watched his hand extend and lay flat against the altar's surface. Nothing happened. The glyph lace stayed lit. The sphere stayed warm in her hands. The chest's interior remained open, its light steady. The man's touch registered with the altar exactly the way any other piece of the surrounding environment registered, as irrelevant. He stepped back. The second contractor was already working a comm device, calling Morren. "Tell him what you like," Sera said. Her voice came out level, which surprised her slightly. "The mechanism already chose. The rods are Vel'Tharan keywork, hereditary line authentication. You can't override it after the fact." "The vault opened," the first contractor said. He was watching her with something that was closer to assessment than threat. "Morren will want that sphere. Morren can have the outer chamber. There's nothing in it but empty stanchions. This vault released on a single authenticated key sequence. That's already done. You run the rods again with a different person's hands and you'll get nothing." The Vel'Tharan built their inheritance mechanisms to single use, one reading per relic, one heir per line. She had not been certain of that when she walked in. She was fairly certain now. "That's why he sent you ahead and took the boat himself. He thought he could get here before me and use the rods himself. He was 11 minutes too slow." The contractor with the comm put the device away. She watched them recalculate. 3 professionals who had been contracted to retrieve an artifact, and were now standing in a vault that had already made its preference extremely clear to someone who was not them, holding a sphere that would presumably do nothing for anyone who wasn't Sera Vane, 17 years old, standing beside her 16-year-old associate who had seaweed on his sleeve. The first contractor looked at the sphere one more time, then he looked at her. "We'll be outside," he said. They left. Jem crossed the vault floor in 5 steps and stood beside her, looking down at the sphere. It had settled to a warm, quiet glow, not performance, just presence. The amber gold panels in the vault ceiling had dimmed from their initial cascade blaze to a steady ambient light, the whole space breathing evenly, like something that had been holding its breath for a very long time and had finally exhaled. "Vel'Tharan," he said quietly. He paused. "Third Dynasty sovereignty vocabulary. Veth is the bloodline word, the unbroken descent marker. Karas is the title, the unbroken heir." "I know what it means," she said. "Your grandmother," he said. "The salvager who sold you those rods. She sold them to you before she sold to Morren. You said she hadn't known what she had." "She knew exactly what she had." Sera looked at the sphere. The glow was steady in her hands, warm against her palms, the inscribed panels of the surface slowly cycling through a low internal light pattern she recognized from the transit rod carvings, the same spiral notation, the same hand glyph pointing inward. "She knew who I was. She just didn't tell me." Jem was quiet for a moment. "We should get out before the tide comes in," he said finally. "Yes. Morren's boat will be at the sea entrance. He'll have pulled back when his contractors called him. He's calculating now, same as they were. If the vault is single-use and the authentication is done, there's nothing left to take." "You sure about that?" Jem asked. "The single-use claim." She looked at him. He had the expression he always got when he was being careful with her, not doubting her capability, but checking the seam of a calculation before they bet their safety on it. 70% sure, she said. The inscription on the third rod specified hereditary single cycle. It is possible the Vel'Tharan had override protocols. "So we move fast." "We move fast," she agreed. She closed her fingers around the sphere and tucked it into the interior pocket of her pack. It settled against her ribs with the same quiet warmth as if it had simply been transferred from one holder to another without objection. The vault around them continued its soft, steady glow, patient, enduring. They moved. The outer chamber was empty. Through the cliff passage, she could see the tide window had shrunk to a pale strip of gray light, 4 minutes at most before the sea reclaimed the entrance. They ran the passage at a crouch, the ceiling grazing her hair, and came out onto the shingle into a flat, salt-heavy wind. The contractors were there as promised, but so was Morren. He must have come ashore while they were still in the vault. The rigid inflatable was beached on the rock shelf 10 meters to the left, its engine cut, and he was standing between them and their own boat with the careful stillness of a man who had made a decision and was waiting to see if it needed to be acted on. "The sphere," he said. She kept walking. "No. I have 3 people here, Sera. You have 3 people who already stood in that vault and saw the authentication complete." She did not slow her pace. Jem was half a step behind her on the right, angled slightly outward, not aggressive, just covering his lane, the way they had practiced moving through contested spaces. They know the rods are spent. They know the sphere responds to one person. You take it from me by force and you have a dead artifact. Vel'Tharan inheritance objects don't transfer under coercion. The bioreactive lock interprets physical stress as hostile contact, and the panels go dark. Permanently. She did not know if that was true. She was approximately 40% sure it was true. Morren studied her face for 3 long seconds. He was very good at reading people. She had expected that. She kept her expression level and let him read whatever he needed to read. He stepped aside. "The Caliph attribution," he said as she passed. "Your grandmother, she took credit for my sourcing work." "I know," Sera said. "I read her notes." She didn't look back. They reached their boat, got it off the shingle in under a minute, and cleared the cliff with 30 seconds to spare before the tide sealed the entrance behind them. The sphere was warm in her pack the whole way back, steady and certain, the way things are when they have finally found the person they were made for.